Most people, when something goes wrong in the garden, reach for a bottle, a fungicide, a pesticide, a foliar spray with a long list of ingredients on the back label. And for a while, it seems to work. The leaves look cleaner, the stems hold up. You feel like you did something. But the next season, the same problems come back, sometimes worse, and you buy another bottle. Here is what nobody told you. You were never fixing the problem. You were covering it. Every time you spray something onto a plant to fight disease from the outside, you are doing the work the plant was designed to do for itself. Because inside every tomato plant, every pepper, every cucumber growing in your backyard right now, there is a defense system, a real one, built over millions of years of evolution. A system that, when it is working, can recognize a fungal attack before you even see the first spot on a leaf. A system that can slow a virus, resist bacteria, and signal its own cells to build stronger walls against whatever is coming. That system has a name. Scientists have studied it for decades, and in most home gardens, it is sitting completely dormant, not because the plant lost it, but because nothing ever told it to wake up. There is something in your medicine cabinet right now. It costs less than $1 for a year's supply. It has been sitting on pharmacy shelves since 1899, and dissolved into a jug of water, it does something that a $40 bottle of commercial plant protectant is designed, at its core, to imitate. I am not going to tell you what it is yet, but I want you to keep that image in mind. A $1 bottle, a jug of water, and a garden that starts protecting itself. If your plants have struggled with disease, if you have watched leaves yellow and curl despite everything you tried, I want you to hear this clearly. It is not because you did not work hard enough. It is not because your soil is wrong, or your climate is difficult, or you simply do not have the right talent for growing things. It is because the model you were handed was built around a fundamental misunderstanding of how plants actually work. The modern gardening industry, and to a larger extent, commercial agriculture, operates on one core assumption, that a plant is a passive object, something that grows if you feed it the right inputs and protect it with the right chemicals. You are the active agent. The plant just sits there and receives. So the system they built makes sense within that logic. You buy fertilizer to give the plant energy it cannot make on its own. You buy fungicide to fight the diseases the plant cannot resist on its own. You buy pesticide to handle the insects the plant cannot repel on its own. Every problem has a product. Every season, a new purchase. But that assumption is wrong. A plant is not passive. It is one of the most sophisticated chemical systems on the planet. When a fungal spore lands on a leaf, a healthy, activated plant does not just sit there and get infected. It detects the intrusion. It signals neighboring cells. It produces its own antimicrobial compounds. It thickens its cell walls. It mounts a response that, in many cases, stops the disease before it ever spreads. The problem is not that your plants cannot do this. The problem is that most of them were never triggered to do it. Think of it less like a plant being weak and more like a fire alarm that was never tested. The system is there. The wiring is intact. But if the alarm has never been activated, it sits silent. And when the fire comes, nobody is ready. What I discovered through years of growing food in a small backyard with almost no budget is that you do not need to buy protection for your plants. You need to remind your plants to protect themselves. That shift in thinking changes everything. What you spend, what you spray, and how you relate to the garden as a living system rather than a production problem to be managed. The method that changed how I grow is not complicated. It is not new. The science behind it has been published in peer-reviewed journals for over 30 years, and it starts with understanding something called SAR. 3 letters that most home gardeners have never heard, but that explain more about plant health than almost anything else you will read this season. In 1990, a plant biologist named John Riles was working at a research institute in North Carolina when his team confirmed something that changed the way serious scientists think about plant disease. They were studying tomato plants, ordinary tomatoes, the kind you would grow in a backyard raised bed. And they discovered that when one part of a plant was exposed to a pathogen, something remarkable happened to the rest of it. Cells that had never been touched by the disease began producing defense compounds. Gene expression shifted across the entire plant. The leaves that were not yet infected started behaving as if they already knew an attack was coming. The plant had issued a warning to itself, and its own biology had responded. They called it systemic acquired resistance, SIR. And what sits at the center of that system, the chemical signal the plant uses to communicate danger from cell to cell, from leaf to root to stem, is a molecule called salicylic acid. When a plant is under attack, it produces salicylic acid. That molecule travels through the plant's vascular system like a message moving through a nervous system. And wherever it arrives, it switches on a set of genes, pathogenesis-related genes, scientists call them, that begin building the plant's defenses. Antimicrobial proteins are produced, cell walls are reinforced, enzymes that break down fungal structures are activated. The plant does not wait to be overwhelmed, it prepares before the damage spreads. Researchers at Cornell University measured what happens to tomato and cucumber plants when SR is fully activated. Disease incidence dropped by 50 to 70% compared to unactivated control plants. Not with a pesticide, not with a fungicide, with the plant's own biology running the way it was designed to run. Now here's the part that stopped me cold the first time I understood it. Salicylic acid is not some rare compound locked away in a laboratory. It is the active core of one of the most common, widely available, inexpensive substances on Earth. Aspirin, acetyl salicylic acid, which your body converts back into salicylic acid within minutes of swallowing it, is the same family of molecule that your plant uses to activate its entire immune response. The $40 bottles of biological plant protectant you will find at garden centers? Read the active ingredient. Many of them are built around synthetic salicylic acid derivatives. The same chemistry, packaged, branded, and marked up to a price that makes it feel like technology. One aspirin tablet, the plain, uncoated kind, 325 milligrams, the ones that have been sitting in pharmacies unchanged since 1899, contains enough salicylic precursor to treat several gallons of water. Dissolved and applied to your plants, it does not add something foreign to the garden. It delivers a signal the plant already knows how to read. It tells the plant, something is coming. Get ready. And a plant that has been told to get ready is a fundamentally different plant than one left waiting in silence. This is not a folk remedy. It is not a gardening myth passed around on forums with no evidence behind it. It is a mechanism confirmed across dozens of peer-reviewed studies, from Rutgers to UC Davis to research institutions in Europe and Asia. The science is settled. What was never settled, what was never prioritized, was getting that science out of academic journals and into the hands of the people growing food in their backyards. That part, I think you can figure out for yourself. So let me show you exactly how I use this. Not as a theory, as a system I have run through multiple growing seasons on tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and leafy greens, in a backyard that gets inconsistent weather and soil that I am still improving every year. The formula is simple enough to write on a piece of tape and stick to the inside of your garden shed door. One aspirin tablet, plain, uncoated, 325 milligrams. The store brand kind costs less than a cent per tablet, sometimes far less when you buy the generic bottle of 100. You dissolve it in 4 liters of water. That is roughly 1 standard watering jug. You stir it for 30 seconds until the tablet fully breaks down and the water runs clear. That is your solution. That is the entire preparation. From there, you have 2 ways to apply it, and I use both depending on where I am in the season. Early in the season, when seedlings have just been transplanted and are still finding their footing, I water the base of each plant with a solution once every 2 weeks. Not every day, not every week. Every 2 weeks, the salicylic acid enters through the root system, moves into the vascular tissue, and begins priming the plant's defense pathways from the inside out. You are not reacting to disease at this stage. You are building the system before disease ever arrives. That timing matters more than almost anything else in this method. Once plants are established and actively growing, once they are flowering, setting fruit, filling out their canopy, I switch to foliar application. I use the same solution in a basic hand sprayer. the kind you can find at any hardware store for a few dollars. Early morning is the best time, before the sun is fully up, so the liquid has time to absorb before the heat of the day. I missed both sides of the leaves. The underside matters because that is where fungal spores most often find their entry point. I do this every 10 to 14 days through the main growing season. The plants that respond most dramatically in my experience are the nightshades. Tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant show the clearest improvement. Fewer instances of early blight, better resistance to the kind of slow fungal spread that usually starts at the bottom leaves and moves upward through the season. Cucumbers and zucchini, which in humid summers can be almost entirely lost to powdery mildew by August, hold their foliage longer and continue producing weeks past what I used to expect from them. Now let me give you the numbers because I think they are worth sitting with for a moment. A bottle of 100 generic aspirin tablets costs somewhere between $1 and $2 at any pharmacy. One tablet per 4 liters of water means one bottle treats 400 liters of solution. In a typical home garden, across a full season of biweekly applications, you will use perhaps 80 to 120 liters of aspirin solution in total. That means one bottle, the one you paid $1.50 for, covers your entire garden for the entire growing season, with tablets left over for next year. The cost per liter of solution is roughly half a cent. Compare that to a commercial biological fungicide or plant immunity booster at a garden center. A 1-liter concentrate, which dilutes to perhaps 30 to 50 liters of working solution, typically sells for between $25 and $45. Read the label. Many of them list potassium silicate, copper compounds, or, and here is the part worth pausing on, salicylic acid or its synthetic derivatives as the primary active ingredient. The chemistry you are paying $40 for is a packaged, branded version of the same signal molecule your aspirin releases for half a cent. I am not saying those products do not work. Some of them work well. What I am saying is that the active mechanism behind many of them is something you already have access to, at a price so low it barely registers as a cost. There is one thing I want to be careful about here, because getting the dose right matters. More is not better with this method. The concentration I described, one standard 325 milligram tablet per 4 liters, is the range that research supports for priming SAR without causing salicylate toxicity in the plant. If you double the concentration out of enthusiasm, you risk the opposite effect. Salicylic acid at high levels can actually suppress plant growth and cause leaf burn. This is a signal the plant is designed to receive in small, precise amounts. Respect that. One tablet, 4 liters, every 10 to 14 days. That rhythm is the system. Start with one bed this season, one crop you care about. Apply it consistently and observe what you see. Not just the absence of disease, but the texture of the leaves, the color of the growth, the way the plant carries itself through stress. A plant running its full immune system looks different from one that is not. Once you see it, you will recognize it immediately. Here is a question worth asking quietly. If this mechanism has been confirmed by peer-reviewed science since the early 1990s, if universities like Cornell and Rutgers published the data, if researchers across 3 continents replicated the results, if the active compound is sitting in every pharmacy on Earth for less than $1, then why have most home gardeners never heard of it? I have thought about this for a long time, and I want to be honest with you about the answer, because I think the honest answer is more useful than a dramatic one. It is not a conspiracy. There is no single meeting room where executives decided to suppress the aspirin research. The reality is quieter than that, and in some ways more worth understanding, because it describes a pattern that affects far more than just this one discovery. Research funding in agriculture follows commercial interest. That is not a criticism. It is simply how the system is structured. When a university laboratory needs funding to study plant disease resistance, it applies for grants. Those grants come from government agencies, from foundations, and increasingly from private industry. The private industry funding that flows into agricultural research comes predominantly from companies that manufacture crop protection products, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, biological inputs. Those companies are not funding research into whether a generic aspirin tablet can replace their product. They are funding research into the next proprietary formulation they can patent, scale, and sell. That is their business. It makes sense within their logic. And so the SAR research, solid, reproducible, published in respected journals, sat largely where academic research sits when it has no commercial champion behind it. In the literature, cited by other scientists, slowly accumulating confirmation across decades, but never translated into the kind of clear, practical language that reaches the person standing in the garden aisle at a hardware store trying to decide between two bottles of spray. What did get translated was the chemistry itself, because salicylic acid, once its role in SAR was understood, became the foundation for an entire category of commercial plant immunity products. The molecule was synthesized, stabilized, combined with adjuvants and surfactants and proprietary carriers, packaged in professional-looking bottles with charts and percentages on the label, and introduced to the market at a price point that reflected the branding far more than the underlying biology. The biology was always the same. The price was the only thing that changed. I think about a FAO field program from the early 2000s that worked with smallholder farmers in parts of South Asia. The program introduced low-cost SAR priming methods, aspirin solutions among them, as a way to reduce pesticide dependency in rice and vegetable cultivation. Field results showed meaningful reductions in disease incidence and measurable decreases in chemical input costs. Farmers with almost no operating budget were protecting crops using a method that cost nearly nothing. The program generated documentation, it produced data, and then it quietly faded the way programs fade when they do not generate the kind of economic activity that sustains institutional attention. I am not telling you this to make you angry. I am telling you this because understanding why certain knowledge stays hidden, not through malice, but through indifference and economic gravity, helps you recognize it when you find it. It helps you hold on to it. It helps you share it with the person next door who is spending $40 a season on something that costs 50 cents at its core. The knowledge did not disappear. It was always there in the journals, in the field reports, in the slow accumulation of evidence that serious plant scientists have been building for 30 years. It just never had anyone paid to carry it across the last mile. From the research paper into your hands, your garden, your watering jug sitting by the shed door. That is what I am trying to do right now. Not because I have anything to sell you, because I have been growing food in a small backyard for a long time, and this is one of the things that actually works. Quietly, consistently, season after season, at a cost so low it barely registers as a cost at all. There is a particular feeling that comes after your first season of growing food with less product, less intervention, less anxiety every time the weather turns humid or you spot the first yellowing leaf on a tomato plant. It is not excitement exactly. It is something quieter than that. A kind of steadiness that builds slowly, the way good soil builds. Not overnight, but through seasons of small, consistent decisions compounding into something real. That is what I want for you. Not a dramatic transformation. Not a garden that suddenly produces twice as much because of one method. Just a gradual shift in the relationship between you and the living system you are tending. A shift away from dependency and towards something that feels more like confidence. The aspirin method is one part of that shift, but what it represents is larger than the method itself. When you stop reaching for a bottle every time something goes wrong and start asking instead what the plant actually needs to defend itself, you begin thinking about your garden differently. You start paying attention to the conditions that weaken plant immunity in the first place. Compacted soil that stresses root systems, inconsistent watering that puts plants in a constant state of physiological tension, spacing that creates the humid, stagnant air that fungal spores love. You start seeing the garden as a system with its own logic, rather than a collection of individual problems, each requiring its own product. That shift over time saves you money in ways that extend far beyond the cost of a bottle of aspirin. Gardeners who work with plant biology rather than around it tend to spend less on inputs across the board. They lose fewer plants to disease. They extend their productive season because their plants are healthier going into the stress periods. The late summer heat, the early autumn damp, that typically end a garden's productivity before it needs to end. They build soil that supports plant immunity naturally because healthy microbial communities in the root zone produce their own salicylic acid signals as part of a functioning ecosystem. This is what year-round resilience actually looks like, not a product, a system that gets stronger the longer you tend it. For a family growing food at home, even in a modest space, the compounding value of this is significant. A garden that produces reliably through disease pressure without the recurring cost of chemical intervention is a garden that earns its place in your life. It feeds your family real food. It builds a skill that does not expire. It creates a small but genuine form of independence from systems, supply chains, price fluctuations, seasonal shortages that you cannot control. I think about that often. The quiet security of knowing that the food growing outside your door is not dependent on a supply chain running smoothly or a product being in stock. That it is growing because you understood something about how plants work and you gave them what they needed to take care of themselves. That is the goal. Not the aspirin specifically, though the aspirin is real and it works. The goal is a garden that you trust, built on methods that you understand, tended with a confidence that comes from experience rather than from whatever the label on the newest product tells you to believe. So here is where I will leave you this season. Pick one bed, one crop that matters to you, tomatoes if you grow them, or cucumbers, or whatever tends to struggle in your climate. Mix one tablet into 4 liters of water. Apply it at the base every 2 weeks from transplant through midsummer, then switch to a light foliar spray through the rest of the season. Keep it consistent. Watch what happens. Not with the urgency of someone waiting for a dramatic result, but with the patience of someone learning a language. The garden will show you what it is doing if you give it time and stay quiet enough to observe. At the end of the season, look back at what you spent, what you lost to disease, how the plants carried themselves through the difficult weeks. Compare it to what you experienced before. That comparison will tell you everything you need to know. The system works. The science is there. The cost is almost nothing. What you do with that is entirely up to you.